Okay, moving on, we're now in part 5 on feminism, Satan's plan to destroy your family. If you'd like to follow along, you can go to creationliberty.com, type in feminism, Feminism, into the search bar, and you should find the article there. I mean, if you're following along at the time I'm doing this recording, I have a banner up on the front page, so you can just click on that banner. But if you don't see that, just type in the word in there and you'll get the article. Or I keep calling it article, it's a book, really. It's a full-length book you can read for free. And if you're not listening by YouTube, there should be a link in the description you can click on. That should take you roughly to where we are, but you'll have to scroll down and find the place we're at if you want to follow along. So last week we ended talking about, I was going over a chart that I had made based on the statistics that came from the U.S. Department of Commerce, talking about the average employment status of custodial parents by gender and poverty status, and that more women are in poverty status when they become single custodial mothers than men are. Yet the courts keep ruling in their favor. Isn't that amazing? They keep ruling in the favor. We're going to do what's in the best interest of the child, but typically we're going to send the child to the person who can't earn as much money. Or who not really can't, but doesn't. I don't want to say can't because that's not really true. They could, but they don't. So how is that in the best interest of the child? I don't know. But anyway, if you can, I mean, we talk about how there's more men work full-time. Even if they're custodial parents, they still work full-time to pay for things, and most women end up living off of the child support. And men do not get that same child support, and we're going to cover more on all that later. But I want to continue here and talk about, because last week I left off and we wanted to talk about how men are being forced to pay for their rapists. And yes, that is happening. For example, a 15-year-old boy who was the victim of statutory rape by a 34-year-old woman, he was sued for child support by her. Yes, she sued a 15-year-old for child support. This is from the County of San Luis Obispo versus Nathaniel J. from 1996. All the court documented information's on there. If you want to go look it up, you can read it for yourself. Quote, a 34-year-old woman seduces a 15-year-old boy and becomes pregnant. She gives birth to a daughter and thereafter applies for aid to families with dependent children. Is the child's father obligated to pay child support even though he is a victim of statutory rape? We conclude he is liable for child support. Yes, the court concluded that the 15-year-old was liable to pay for the rapist and the child that she bore. The San Luis Obispo County District Attorney's Office sought child support and welfare reimbursement from Nathaniel J. Nathaniel J., by a guardian ad litem, admitted paternity but contended he was not required to pay child support because he was a victim of statutory rape. So he says, yes, that would definitely be my child, but I didn't consent to any of this. And it continues, it says, at the July 19th, 1995 hearing at which Nathaniel J. appeared through his attorney, the district attorney said, our office is seeking to establish paternity. We are not seeking a child support order. And some of you may be thinking, oh, okay, so they're just looking to establish paternity. They're not really seeking child support. That's good. Well, keep reading. It says, we are not seeking a child support order until such time as the minor becomes an adult and is able to pay child support, end quote. We're not really suing a 15-year-old. We're going to wait till you're 18, and then we're going to make you pay retroactively all the child support you missed from the ages of 15 to 18. Correct. That is exactly what they do, and that's exactly what the law requires. They're going to sue for the retroactive amounts from the moment he was 15 up until the point that they're going to demand he pay child support. Now, stop and think about this for a minute. If a young girl was raped, and the court ordered that she was required not only to pay for the child, or let's say she was raped and they arrested the person, but the rapist, let's say they were required to go to a psychologist and to work things out, and let's say the young girl was required to pay for the rapist's meals, their housing, and any psychological treatment that was done afterwards, and that she was required to pay for all that for her rapist. there would be fires and riots and looting in the streets from all these so-called social justice warriors, these Smurfs, as I like to call them. There would just be rioting. They would be furious. There would be mainstream media hysteria over that. But when it's a boy, who cares? They're expendable, right? I mean, this boy's going to be stuck with monthly payments until he's in his 30s. I mean, well, he did already because this took place about 20 years ago. But he's stuck with monthly payments until he's in his 30s, and the story almost never sees the light of day. What happened to that male privilege that we keep hearing about so much? I thought it was the males. See, because privilege, remember, that's a person who gets someone else to carry their burdens. I thought it was the males who had the females carry all their burdens. Why does the evidence seem to present the opposite? And again, ladies, I'm not saying that any of this needs to change. And I don't think, based on the conversations I've had with men, I don't think men want females' privilege to change. We work very hard to make sure women are privileged. What we want women to do is recognize the privilege that they have, and not to believe the mainstream media, the communist philosophy, and it is a communist philosophy of the feminists, to think that women are somehow underprivileged. They are way overprivileged. And men sacrifice a lot to make sure that that continues. Now, the story of Frank Hatley reveals a little bit more of this illusion of male privilege. Since he paid tens of thousands of dollars in child support payments, he suffered short jail sentences for not being able to pay during terms of unemployment. And yes, that's called a debtor's prison. That's what that is. Very contradictory. Having a debtor's prison is one of the most contradictory things ever. That's why, like, for example, in the Bible, if you stole something, there was a lot of, let's say this, there was a lot of sins, a lot of crimes that was punishable by death, but theft was not one of them. Okay? Theft was also not punishable. Like you'll find if you go back to the Old Testament in the nation of the Jews, there wasn't really a jail system. There was like holding for certain judgments, but there wasn't a jail where people go for years and years because, I mean, what's the problem with that? Well, you see, the general public has to pay for the building, they have to pay for the meals, they have to pay for the water, the electricity. The public has to pay for that. Why are we paying for criminals? I mean, we're just giving our money out to pay for the criminals, right? The Bible taught more either you have to pay back what you took or you are executed for certain things. And that, I mean, one thing I would say that would deter a lot of crime is if you had a public execution for a criminal. That would deter a lot of crime, wouldn't it? I think at a public display, and that's what they used to do. I'm not necessarily saying we need to go back to that one way or another. I mean, I'm not saying it's a bad idea. Because I think, well, you see, I'm not going to get into all that right now because it's getting us off topic. But the point is, in the Bible, if you stole something, they didn't put you in prison, they didn't execute you, they didn't cut off your hands as they do in the barbaric Arabian countries. No. If you put someone in jail, if you kill someone, or if you cut off their hands, who suffers? Not the criminal. He's not the one that really suffers. It's the person that was stolen from. They never get any justice. The Bible gives them justice because the thief was supposed to pay back 4 to 5 times whatever he stole. And so if you put him in prison, how can he pay it back? That's why debtors' prisons don't make any sense. And throwing them in jail doesn't make any sense either. They need to be forced to pay back multiple times everything they stole. That way, if somebody had stuff stolen from them and they caught the thief, that's actually almost like a payday for you. It's not a dread. It's excitement. It's like, well, hey, I'm going to get a lot more back now. And so that way it blesses the person who's doing what's right, who's living honestly, and it punishes the thief properly. To where they're like, man, I don't want to have to pay 4 to 5 times back what I took anymore. I'm not going to take anything anymore. Because if I get caught, it's going to be hell to pay on me. Yeah, that's right. That's the way it ought to be. Okay. What they're doing is they're sticking these men who are supposed to owe child support, even unjustly owe child support, they're sticking them in prison to where they can't pay. And then they have to come out and still pay everything that they missed while they were in prison as well. That happens. So, anyway, this guy, he suffered short jail sentences, this guy named Hatley. for not paying during his terms of unemployment when he couldn't find a job. And after all these years, it turns out the child wasn't even his. Why? Because the woman lied about who the father was. Here's the story from a CNN article called "Childless Man Released from Child Support Debt." And I think the CNN article is covering up because that's not even the correct title. It shouldn't be the correct title. It doesn't even make sense. Because he wasn't technically released from the child support debt at all. But I think it's a title that more appeals to the feminist crowd, because again, it's the communist news network, so you have to appeal to your communist readers. But let's get the full story. Quote, Frank Hatley, 50, spent 13 months in jail for being a deadbeat dad before his release last month. A judge ordered him jailed in June 2008 for failing to support his son, a child who DNA tests proved was not fathered by Hatley. His story dates back to 1986 when Hatley had a relationship with Essie Lee Morrison, who gave birth to a son. According to the court documents, Morrison, the female, told Hatley, the male, this is the mother and the father, Morrison told Hatley the child was his. But the two ended their relationship shortly after the child was born. Now, before I even continue, I want to say, Christians, young men, young women, listen up. This is why you don't have sex until you're married. If you will simply follow the Bible's structure for how it's supposed to be, you won't get into these problems in the first place. Okay? So, very important lesson to learn here. I know all the world wants to fight against the Bible and claim that they do no wrong and that they're inherently good, and people have been doing that kind of junk for thousands of years, okay? And they all think it's brand new. Every generation thinks they're brand new, right? This is the same kind of excuses people have been making for thousands of years. Look, the Bible has a particular structure for a reason, and it works out better if you follow that structure. And that's something that a lot of the wicked people out here who scoff at the Bible, they hate when you point that out. That the people who actually follow the biblical structure are happier, they have better homes, they have better behaved children who are more responsible. I mean, all this stuff happens when you follow the biblical structure. It's almost as if God knows what he's talking about. I mean, isn't that amazing? So it continues and says, the couple never married and never lived together, the document said. When the child turned 2, Morrison, that's the mother, applied for support for the child. Under Georgia law, the state can recoup the cost of the assistance from a child's non-custodial parent. For 13 years, Hatley made payments to the state until learning in 2000 that the boy might not be his. A DNA test that year confirmed the child was not fathered by Hatley, court documents said. He returned to court and was relieved of any future child support payments, but was ordered to pay more than $16,000 he owed the state before the ruling. Since 2000, Hatley paid that debt down to about $10,000. Court documents showed he was jailed for 6 months in 2006 for falling behind on payments during a period of unemployment, but afterward he resumed making payments, continuing to do so after he lost another job and became homeless in 2008. So let's put a little perspective on this. What he had to do was say, either I paid my child support or I pay my rent. So he chose to pay child support, fearing not the woman, but fearing the state. He says, I don't want to go back to jail, so I guess I'll just become homeless. Why? Because male privilege. But last year he became unable to make the payments and was jailed. So he has worked himself as much as he can, lost his job, became homeless, putting all the money he could into the child support he still couldn't pay, for a child that was not his, and the woman lied. The woman was never prosecuted for committing perjury in court. And she doesn't have to pay the money back. At least so far. The argument for keeping Hatley liable for the back payments, according to the attorney who represented him in 2000, was that he signed a consent agreement with the Office of Child Support Services. The court agreed that Hatley had to comply with the consent agreement for the period he believed the child was his son, said attorney Letitia Bradley. Two things still remain to be cleared up for Hatley, Grotti said. Lifting the child support holds on his driver's license. Yes, that they do this, and many, many states do this. If you don't pay child support, then they take your driver's license. Well, that's interesting, because if someone has a hard time finding a job, they can't find one locally, you would kind of need a vehicle to expand the radius of area that you would need to be able to cover in order to, if you expand the diameter of your overall circumference of influence where you can find a job, if I can go drive 10 minutes somewhere, then you're much more likely to find the work in order to pay the child support. But what they want to do is take away your driver's license, so that way you can't find a job. And if you can't find a job, you go to jail. If you go to jail, you can't find a job to pay child support. If you don't pay child support, they take your driver's license, so you can't find a job. And then if they take your driver's license, well, then you end up going to jail because you can't find a job. And if you go to jail, you can't pay child support. Does anybody sense a little circularity to this whole thing? Yeah. It's a trap of circular reasoning. So there's two things they wanted to clear up, right? His getting his driver's license back. Look, they took his driver's license and they won't give it back. The child isn't even his. And it says it remains unclear whether he will be reimbursed for the $6,000 in payments he made since 2000. She said, so far, he has not been, end quote. Because where's the reimbursement going to come from? It's not going to come from the state. It would have to come from Essie Morrison, the mother. She's not going to give him that money back. No way. She's living off his child support. The man can be homeless as far as she's concerned as long as she gets that check. Because male privilege. Proverbs chapter 6, starting at verse 16, these 6 things doth the Lord hate. Yea, 7 are an abomination unto him, a proud look, a lying tongue, and hands that shed innocent blood, a heart that deviseth wicked imaginations, feet that be swift in running to mischief, a false witness that speaketh lies, and he that soweth discord among brethren. A false witness that speaketh lies. See, I don't know anything about this woman, but obviously she was sleeping around with multiple men. Otherwise, there wouldn't have been the confusion, would there? And so probably what she did is when she wanted to get some child support, somebody told her, well, you should be getting child support. It was probably, some other feminist that told her, you ought to be getting child support for that child. Even though she didn't know who the father was, just put a name down. That's all she has to do. Put a name down on the document. She puts a name down. The man believes her, because after all, women will never lie, right? It's impossible for women to lie. That seems to be the way it's treated. So he believed what she said and accepted to pay child support payments without checking it out first. He should have demanded... Well, I mean, it's not that he should have demanded. The problem was back in the late 1980s, DNA testing wasn't readily available. So if it comes to court and the woman says the child's his and he says it's not mine, how do you determine the truth? Well, somebody has to be believed, right? Who gets believed in a court? It's the one who is most privileged is the one that gets believed most often. I'll let you figure out who that is. But she's not going to pay a dime of that money back. No. Because male privilege, right? Now, there's a law called the Bradley Amendment. It was named after Senator Bill Bradley of New Jersey, which prevents any child support payments from being prohibited, reduced, or forgiven under any circumstance. That means a man must pay full child support payments without regard to circumstances, period. So if a man gets deployed into active frontline combat duty in the military, he must make full child support payments. Or if he doesn't, he has to at least make them up and pay the full amount if he missed them. If a man is put in prison, he must make full child support payments. If he loses his job and he can't find another one, he must make full child support payments. Are these kind of conditions ever put on women? not really. If he's hospitalized and put in a coma, yes, when he wakes up, he is responsible to pay in full all child support payments he missed. And most important of all, as we've already seen, if the child is proven not to be his, no retroactive modification is allowed to be made, meaning that the man is liable for all child support payments, or in other words, a woman can fornicate and commit adultery all they want, and the man is held fiscally responsible for her actions. If he doesn't pay up, then he goes to jail, and there is no hearing, only immediate sentencing. Folks, that is called female privilege. That is the very definition of female privilege. Now, this next part is kind of tragic, what I'm going to read you. This is I've mentioned Phyllis Schlafly before. Yes, I've mentioned some of the problems with Phyllis Schlafly, but at the same time, she's had a lot of experience in her life of fighting against all the feminist nonsense. And what she's going to say here is really sad, because we have to keep in mind that two out of three divorce filings are filed by women. And this is in some states, it's up to 81% of divorce filings are done by women, as we saw in previous teachings. But here's where the problem really hits, is when military men who are away from home for a long period of time. See, the wife gets lonely, she decides to abandon him and join up with some other man, and so she files for divorce while he's away. And I mean, not just files for divorce, there's other problems too. I mean, they'll file a divorce, they will up and move their children without them ever knowing where their children are. I'll get to that in a second. We'll listen to what Schlafly has to say here. But she gets lonely, decides to abandon him, file for divorce, then requires him to pay for the children, even though they disappeared and he never gets to see them. Here's what Schlafly wrote, quote, "Most of the reservists called up to serve in the Iraq War have paid a big price, a significant reduction of their wages as they transferred from civilian to military jobs, separation from their loved ones, and of course the risk of battle wounds or death. Regrettably, on their return home, those who are divorced fathers could face another grievous penalty, loss of their children, financial ruin, prosecution as deadbeat dads, and even jail." You see, the term deadbeat dads, who's that applied to? Those who don't pay child support, right? A military man who's on the front lines taking bullets and then comes home is automatically labeled a deadbeat dad because he didn't pay child support. This is what happens. Reservists' child support orders were based on their civilian wages, and when they are called up to active duty, that burden doesn't decrease at all. So first of all, I want to make mention that we mentioned earlier, if you remember, that deadbeat moms are actually more common than deadbeat dads, but we never hear about the deadbeat moms, do we? Almost never. Deadbeat dads is all we hear about all the time, but females not paying is actually more frequent. And what they just said was that the child support orders were based on civilian wages. What does that mean? Well, you see, if the reservist gets called up into active duty, his wages are actually less than he would have been making as a civilian. But you see, they don't lower the amount of child support payments he needs to make. See, the court doesn't really care how much money it takes to raise the child. They care how much money do you have, how much money can the woman get out of you. So it's not even, they're not consistent on any level here. So now he's making less, but still has to pay more than he normally would have if it was analyzed on his military pay. It continues, it says, few can get court modification before they leave. Modifications are seldom granted anyway, and even if a father applied for modification before deployment, the debt continues to grow until the case is decided much later. So, what happens here? Well, if he wants a modification, he's like, look, I'm making less now, I can't pay that much anymore. There may be a modification granted, and remember, you have to stop and consider, this was written back in 2005 when she wrote this. It's now 2017. The Bradley Amendment has been in effect only recently has it been in effect. So she wrote this before the Bradley Amendment was largely in effect. And now they won't even grant the modifications. Okay? But even if they can get into the court, and even if they can get the modification, guess where they have to be to get the ruling for the modification? In court. When they're on the front lines of duty in another country, they can't be in court. So finally, when their tour ends and they get out of the military to get in court, they now they have to go back and try to find another job to make up for it, and they can't get the modification because now they're no longer part of the military. I mean, it's enough to pull your hair out. But it's male privilege, right? This is the privilege that males are born with. It's insane to me how many women I have heard in my lifetime try to say why men are the way they are and think they know so much about what men have to go through and thinking that men have it easy. I have heard that over and over growing up. Women sit back and think they know what men have to go through. Even though I talked about earlier that woman who tried an experiment of living as a man for like a year and a half or 2 years, and she almost killed herself because she couldn't handle it. Women don't understand what men have to go through any more than men understand what women have to go through. That's like if I wrote a book called The Third Trimester and What to Expect. You couldn't possibly take that seriously, because I don't know what women have to go through with that. But why is it that women have the nerve to stand up and say that they know what men have to go through, while they sit in all their privilege and think that they can sit back and say men just have it so easy? Men have it a lot harder because they're the underprivileged ones. Okay? And it just blows my mind sometimes. I mean, I'm not saying that women need to have their privilege taken away. Again, don't misunderstand me. But we want women to acknowledge that stuff. And I'm not saying you Christian women out there that all of you have been really hard on men and things like that, but many of you out there have grown up with this philosophical concept because you've been taught the same feminism that the men have been taught, and we've all been deceived by it. Let's start acknowledging the truth of what's going on here. But this gets worse. She continues to say, these servicemen, fathers, cannot get relief when they return because federal law forbids a court to reduce the debt retroactively. Retroactively means going back through the past. Okay, the debt cannot be reduced retroactively. Well, you missed a bunch of stuff, but we can't reduce that, so you're still going to owe everything that you were supposed to pay while you were taking bullets in the front line. Once the arrearage reaches $5,000, the father becomes a felon, subject to imprisonment plus the loss of his driver's and professional licenses and passport. Correct. If he was overseas working active duty military combat, right? If he was overseas doing that, and the debt racked up to $5,000, when he gets home, he's a felon. Likewise, there is no forgiving of the interest and penalties on the child support debt, even though it is sometimes incurred because of human or computer errors. Let me make sure I clarify that. If a secretary enters in the wrong number, a higher number, by accident on the form, you can't have it changed, especially with the Bradley Amendment in effect now. With the Bradley Amendment, now, if they make an error, oh, well, they meant to type in that you owed $500 a month, but they actually typed in $6. Well, too bad, you owe $600 a month. There's no changing it. If information with data was copied over and there was a computer error where you got switched up with someone else, well, too bad, you owe the extra money. Because male privilege. States have a financial incentive to refuse to reduce obligations. Yes, they have financial incentive to refuse to reduce obligations because the federal government rewards states. That means they're subsidizing with cash for the deadbeat dad dollars they collect. That's right, there are federal programs that give states bonuses, bonus tax dollar money, if they collect money from the so-called deadbeat dads. They don't get tax incentive money for collecting from the deadbeat moms. Because male privilege. Laws granting deployed service personnel protection against legal actions at home date back decades, but they are ignored in family courts. The protection of military personnel are completely ignored in the family court. That's what she's saying. And this woman's a lawyer, or she was a lawyer. She died last September, but she was a lawyer for about 40 years. So she knows what she's talking about. Child kidnapping laws do not protect military personnel on active duty from their ex-wives relocating their children. See, they call it relocation, but she labels it more accurately. It's called child kidnapping. Without his knowledge. But he has to pay all the child support for them, even though he doesn't know where they are, doesn't get to see them. He can be out, military combat, front lines, get home, come back to his house, wherever it is, to hopefully be greeted by his family, only to find out that somebody else lives there. And he doesn't have a home anymore. This stuff happens, folks. This injustice to our reservists serving in Iraq should be remedied by Congress and state legislatures before more fathers meet the fate of Bobby Sherrill, a father of two from North Carolina who worked for Lockheed in Kuwait before being captured and held hostage by Iraq for 5 terrible months. He was a POW, that's a prisoner of war, for 5 months. He was finally released, sent home. She said the night he returned from the Persian Gulf, he was arrested for failing to pay $1,425 in child support while he was a captive, end quote. POW, we don't care, pay up. Because male privilege. Truck driver Donald Gardner learned about this so-called male privilege the hard way when he ran into some of his own problems. This is from an article from the New York Times called "When Child Support is Due, Even the Poor Find Little Mercy." Quote, Donald Gardner owes $119,846 in back child support to his former wife. Yes, he owes a little under $120,000. But there is little chance he will pay it soon or ever. Mr. Gardner broke 27 bones in a car accident in 1997. Being in and out of hospitals for 3 years left him penniless, and when he tried to return to work, he found that the state had suspended his driver's license because of his accumulated child support debt. That prevented him from going back to work as an interstate truck driver, a job he had held for a decade before the accident. I've decided that I'd like to get this behind me and pay the support, said Mr. Gardner, 47, who now lives in a homeless shelter in Harlem. But if I can't drive, I can't pay. It's like a catch-22. No, Mr. Gardner. It's not like a catch-22. It is a catch-22. The article continues and says everybody loves to hate the so-called deadbeat dads. Legislators in many states across the country passed tough measures that allowed for, among other things, revocation of any state license and direct access to bank accounts of men not meeting their payments, end quote. That means you can't access your bank account. You have any savings that you had in there that you were going to pay your rent with, that you were going to buy food with? Gone. You don't get access to that. But my check is being auto-deposited. Too bad. How am I supposed to get money to eat? Well, the court doesn't care. And obviously the women don't care either. After all, men, this is your privilege in life. Do any of you honestly believe the Lord Jesus Christ is happy with this? You realize there's a whole sect called Christian feminism, right? Oh yeah. People walking around supporting this feminist junk that call themselves Christians. Unbelievable. You think the Lord Jesus Christ is pleased with this? Something to think about. The government, on behalf of these feminists, demand that a man pay his child support payments no matter what. Ladies, I'd just like to ask a very simple question for you to consider. If a man wants to pay child support, let's say he really wants to pay it, but he's in a situation that Gardner was in, where that's his only line of work and the government's preventing him from doing it, What's he supposed to do? You as women, stop and consider, what if you had to pay all that money? And the government said, you're not allowed to drive. What are you supposed to do? See, women typically, they know what they can do. They can call help groups. They can call people and find government assistance. They can flash a tearful eye and get assistance. Men can't do any of those things. Men don't have support groups. Men don't have government help. Men can't flash tears, because when they flash tears, they're punched in the face and told to stand up and be a man. Quit your crying. I'm not saying that needs to end. Men ought to be tough. But can we have a little stop and consider, for their sakes a little bit, what's happening in our country right now? Forbes magazine reported that of all the alimony payments being made in the U.S., women are on the receiving end 97% of the time. From this article from Forbes called "Why Do So Few Men Get Alimony?" it says, quote, of the 400,000 people in the United States receiving post-divorce spousal maintenance, just 3% were men. You know why? You want me to tell you why that is? It's because when bills need to be paid and there is a child that needs feeding, there's a difference between men and women here. Women say, somebody needs to give me that money. That's generally what it is. But the men, more often, I'm not saying all you women out there are like this, don't misunderstand, okay? I'm saying this is the general feminist philosophical attitude that America has adopted when I'm saying this. I'm not saying every individual woman is out there is like this. There are many women out there who are not like this, but there are many others who are. Where they say, somebody needs to give me money to feed this child and pay these bills. The men say, I need to get out there and earn money to feed this child and pay these bills. There's a huge difference of philosophical thinking there. And that's why just 3% are men. Because if men are demanding money from women, that's not a manly thing to do. But women demanding money from men, that's a feminine thing to do. Isn't it? Well, yeah. I mean, even in the Bible, that's what men are supposed to do their best to provide. That's a biblical thing to do. That's why those numbers turn out that way. But that's according to the census figures, it says, and it continues to say, yet 40% of the households are headed by female breadwinners, suggesting that hundreds of thousands of men are eligible for alimony. That's right, they're eligible for it, yet don't receive it. Why? Again, it's not a manly thing to do and go demand money from women. Even though the women owe it, they still don't have to pay it. Why? Because male privilege, obviously. Gender equality is a relatively new concept in the span of history, and old stereotypes die hard, says San Francisco Bay area divorce attorney Mark Ressa. A successful man is considered a breadwinning man, and asking for alimony is considered emasculating, end quote. Well, I mean, that's just supporting what I was talking about, right? They're saying the exact same thing. Yeah, it's emasculating to go and demand money from women. Men are expected to go and earn it. Okay? Well, you see, men are expected to be good fathers and husbands. Why is the same expectation in our society not put on women to be good wives and mothers? I'll tell you why. It's because they're already presumed that if you are a female, if you are born female, then you're automatically a good wife and mother. That is not true. There are women I have met who believe they are strong, good, responsible women and good wives and mothers who are terrible. And it's, folks, self-deception is a plague in this country. I mean, it's an epidemic that needs a cure, and I'm doing my best to present the cure as well as the Lord Jesus Christ will allow me. But I can only help so many people, okay? And generally, that's a cure. You can only give it to people if they want it. But anyway, let's continue here. Now, men are held responsible not only for child support payments if they are raped by a woman. See, they're raped, but they have to pay for their rapist, but also if a woman steals their sperm. Yes, the woman steals the seed of the man without his knowledge, and he is liable for all payments. There have been numerous examples of court cases in which a man and woman engaged in sexual activity without a condom, and afterwards the woman took the condom and impregnated herself without his consent, and the man is still held accountable for child support. The National Legal Research Group explained more of this in a study they did. It's entitled, "It's 10 o'clock, do you know where your sperm are? Toward a strict liability theory of parentage," in which it says, quote, "In State versus Frazard," and it gives all the references to the documentation numbers you will need to look up the court case if you want to read it for yourself, from 1997. It says, "The mother and father of the child for whom support was sought met in a hospital while the father was visiting an ill relative. The mother was a nurse's aide who had access to a variety of medical equipment. The mother offered to perform oral sex on the father, and in the words of the father, as any male would, I did not refuse." Wrong. First of all, that's wrong. It's not saying that a male wouldn't refuse, because I'm telling you, young Christian men and women, and even older ones if you're in this situation, if you're in a place like that in a hospital and a woman is willing to just automatically up and have some sort of sexual interaction with you, you don't even know who this is, and they're just willing to do that, run. Get out. She's dangerous. Get as far away from her as you possibly can. And you're about to see why. It continues, it says, "The mother had the father wear a condom. The mother then removed the condom for the father, and unknown to the father, she inseminated herself with the father's sperm using a syringe in a nearby bathroom." Okay, so they didn't even have sexual intercourse. This was just a matter of her getting a hold of his seed. The Louisiana court, noting that the probability of paternity was 99.9994%, held the father's testimony that he had some sort of sexual contact with the plaintiff around the time frame of the alleged conception, although he denied that they had sexual intercourse, was sufficient to prove paternity. Right? So paternity was proved in court, obviously. But this was without his consent. It continues to say, "This fact of paternity obliges a father to support his child. In essence, because the father intentionally engaged in a sexual act resulting in the deposit of sperm with the mother, he was liable for child support." End quote. Again, folks, when you get near women like that, I know there can be temptation, but you need to flee. And that's why 1 Corinthians 6:18 says, "Flee fornication." Get out, get away from her as quickly as possible. Okay? But he's obligated to pay child support. Let's say a woman was tied up and forcefully injected with the man's seed, sperm, right? She was forcefully injected against her will. And then she was given full responsibility of the child and no one else was. She had to pay for everything. On top of that, end up having to pay for him as well, for the guy who did it. That's horrific. But because it's men, who cares? They're expendable. The report continues to say, quote, "Another case reaching the same result on the facts that are quite frankly bizarre is SF versus State," and it gives all the reference to the documentation there in 1996. "In that case, the father testified that he went to a party at the mother's house. He had been drinking for several hours before he arrived and had in fact gotten sick on the way to her house. At the mother's house, the father continued to drink, and the last thing he remembered was getting sick again and his brother putting him in a bed at the mother's house." Now, here's lesson number 2. This is why I tell people, just stay away from alcohol. There's an article we have. If you type in the word alcohol into the search bar at creationliberty.com, there's an article called "The Bible versus Alcohol." Look at the scripture, what God warns people about concerning these issues, okay? And a Christian ought to stay away from alcohol, period. There's good reason for that, as we're going to see. So they put him in bed at the mother's house. The next morning, the father awoke in that same bed with only his shirt on. The father did not remember having sex with the mother, and he did not knowingly or purposefully have sex with her. The father's brother testified as to the same facts. A friend of both the father and the mother testified as to the same facts. So there's multiple eyewitnesses confirming this. Plus the fact that about 2 months after the party, the mother said she had had sex with the father while he was, quote-unquote, passed out, and that it had saved her a trip to the sperm bank. Another friend testified that the mother had said she had had sex with the father and he wasn't even aware of it. So we have multiple collaborating eyewitnesses from both sides of the fence who collaborate that he was indeed raped. A physician testified that it is possible that a man who is intoxicated to the point of losing consciousness may nevertheless have an erection and ejaculate. They are not conscious, voluntary activities. And that is true. A lot of people say, well, a man can't be raped. Yes, he can, okay? Because your body's physiological response is not necessarily indicative of your willingness to participate, okay? It would be the same to say that a woman's body's physiological response to sexual stimuli automatically means that she wants it. That is not true. That's horrific to say that, but you can say it about men, right? Oh yeah, it's okay because men are expendable and who cares about them? Exactly. That's the way it's treated. It continues here and says, the father argued that because he did not have sex voluntarily with the mother, he was not liable for child support. The court deposed of the argument, comparing it to the arguments made in L. Pamela versus Frank S., the wrongful conduct of the mother in causing conception did not obviate the father's support obligation. Obviate means remove. So the court, what they did is they referenced to another court case in which it was ruled that the wrongful conduct of the mother causing conception, meaning that she committed rape, she did that which is illegal. Okay, we're going to talk about how the definitions of rape have actually recently been changed in order to include women, because over the past couple hundred years, rape never included women. I'm talking about the past 200 years of our country, okay? Legal definition of rape did not include women. And that was only recently changed. But they point to other court cases in when a woman committed a crime, she's not held accountable. That's called female privilege. So you always hear these feminists say, men check your privilege. No, women, you check your privilege at the door. The court also compared the father's arguments to the arguments put forth in statutory rape cases, concluding that the rape of the father could not preclude a finding of liability for support. The lesson one can take from Frizard is simple. A man is strictly liable for where his sperm ends up when he voluntarily engages in a sexual act. The lesson one must take from SF versus State, however, is somewhat troubling. A man is strictly liable for where his sperm ends up even when he unknowingly and involuntarily engages in a sexual act. What that means is rape. If a woman rapes a man, he is fully responsible to pay for her and the child. If a man rapes a woman, he is fully responsible to pay for her and the child. No matter what crime is committed, he is fully responsible. Continues to say, instead of comparing the father's predicament with the mother's predicament in Division of Child Support Enforcement, Esther M. versus Mary L., and there's all the case court numbers from 1994, where a mother was relieved of her child support obligation because she was raped. Okay, so you see where a mother, it was another situation in which the father would have had the child, but because the mother was raped, she was relieved of any child support obligation. The court, it continues to say, imposed a child support obligation on the man. Isn't that interesting? It doesn't matter which side committed the crime, the man's fully responsible no matter what. It ends by saying this can only be termed a strict liability theory of sperm, end quote. It's insane, I know. But you can thank feminism. From first wave to third wave, I don't care which wave you want to talk about. Feminism in general has caused this to happen. And young men, you need to know the law before you get involved with any woman. And I've had people in the past write me, many emails in the past write me, people saying, well, do I necessarily need to marry a Christian woman? You would be insane not to. You have to understand that marrying a Christian woman is about the belief system. It is, I mean, you have to understand, everybody is personally responsible for making sure that they repent and believe on the Lord Jesus Christ for the saving of their souls. Okay? You can't save somebody else's soul. Only the Lord Jesus Christ can do that. What's really important about the Christian marriage is the philosophical concept. Now, philosophy just means a way of thinking. That's all that means. You either have a way of thinking of the world or you have a way of thinking that's of Christ. Okay? The way you think determines how you behave. Or what you believe determines how you behave, because what you believe determines the way that you think. Okay? So if you marry a woman who does not have biblical understanding, she's going to have a philosophy that's more of the world. And she will take advantage of things like this. But if you marry a woman who has a biblical philosophy, then you are safer than you would be without it. There is nothing in the Bible, men, that says you cannot marry a non-Christian woman. But if you're going to do it, be prepared to face the consequences. And don't look for me to feel sorry for you, because that is the choice that you made. Now, some people, they marry and then become Christians later. Okay, that's a sad situation. You didn't know what you were doing. And that I can feel sorry for you. But if as an active Christian you decide to marry a non-Christian woman, be prepared to pay the consequences of your actions. I mean, I'll listen. It's not like I won't talk to you or won't listen to you, but don't expect a lot of sympathy. Because you made your bed, as you know, some of your mothers have told, my mother told me, and many other mothers told many of you, you made your bed, now you have to lie in it. But you need to know that you're held responsible no matter what happens, even if you're not at fault. And if you are dating or having interest in any woman who is a feminist, you need to end that relationship immediately and get as far away from her as possible for your own sake. Now, one of the last things I want to talk about before we end today is that I firmly believe, I mean, how do we solve all these problems in our society? All these men who are being taken advantage of, how do we solve this? The solution is dropping all government-enforced child support, period. Now, there's going to be people that will firmly disagree with me and say, wait, Chris, well, why don't you just hear me out for a minute? Let me run through the logic of the situation and just hear me out, all right? I know people are going to get angry, upset with me, and there might be some people that are calling themselves Christians that are going to be like, well, I'm not going to have any more to do with him. How dare he say we get rid of child support? Children need to be supported. I didn't say children did not need to be supported. I said we need to drop all government-enforced child support. All the government-enforced laws, government-enforced regulations, government-enforced agencies that force men to pay child support, because we cannot live in a healthy, liberty-based society and still have government-sanctioned child support. Now, to help understand this a little bit better, let's pose a couple questions here. First, has heavier government intervention on most matters helped or harmed our country? The more government gets involved in something, does it make your life better or worse? Anybody with half a brain can figure out the more government gets involved, the worse the problem gets. Okay? Now, there's some people that will say, no, more government gets involved, it gets better. But that's usually from people that are taking the free government handouts, which aren't free, they're coming out of our tax dollars. Okay? It's people that are living off the government are the ones that say government is really good when it gets involved in things. It's also people who are earning paychecks from the government who say that government getting involved in things is good for the people, when it's really not, okay? It's always somebody who's getting some selfish benefit that says, oh, if they get selfish benefits from them, well, then the government's good. You see, it's the people that are working hard to earn their own keep are saying we want the government to get out of our business because they don't help situations. We could give tons of examples, okay? Like, for example, there was a situation after Mount St. Helens had erupted where there was a bunch of forest. Trees were blown down by the millions, okay? Just tons of trees. The entire lake near where it blew up, the lake was filled with logs. You could actually walk across the local lake there because there were so many logs of trees on it. Anyway, when the trees were blown down, there was part of the property where these trees were blown down that was owned privately, and part of the property was owned by government. What happened is that the government property, there was a bunch of tree huggers, these environmentalists, that waste everybody's time. They come in there and they say, no, don't touch this. We just have to let it, let the land rest. Let the land grow on its own. Don't touch any of the dead trees or anything like that. Just let it be, right? So the government didn't touch it. The people that own private property, they started cleaning out the trees. They moved out all the dead trees and they replanted new ones. 20 years later, the people who had private property ownership of their land, they were having an actively growing forest, while did not have an actively growing forest on the side that they just left it alone. You see, the government getting involved and listening to the whining of a small minority of people and then just going the way that they whine because, again, like I've said before, and I tried to teach young men and women, that the first thing you need to know about government is that the squeaky wheel gets the grease. And again, that's the squeaky wheel runs over and gets real annoying. And so in order to shut up the squeaky wheel, you give it the oil. Just like the government, in order to shut up the whining feminists and the whining environmentalists and the whining Black Lives Matter crowd, in order to shut them up, they give them what they want. And that's why they said, hey, if we scream and cry, we can get what we want. I think we need to scream and cry louder. And so that's what they do. Government is really stupid when it comes down to it, the bottom line, okay? It's really hard to describe in some ways all the different details of it. But the bottom line is that the people who own private property, they do better with what they have. When government gets involved, it actually makes things worse. And that's why the Bible encourages private property ownership and is against the communist leanings that we see from a lot of people today. So the government getting involved is making a huge mistake in the first place. The next question we need to ask is, how can we get men to pay for their children, to pay for their wives, to pay for their children without government intervention? How do you get men to want to pay for their wives and their children without government intervention? See, government intervention threatens them with jail time, it threatens them with debt, it threatens them, we're going to take away your passport, we're going to take away your licenses, we're going to take away all this stuff. Punishment, punishment, punishment. That is not a motivating factor, okay? It puts them into slavery. How, in a liberty-based society, do we get men to want to pay for their wives and children automatically on their own? If we're going to answer that question, I want to get people to understand this from a different perspective. Let's ask the question, how do I get more people to frequent my place of business and spend money? Now that's the question we ought to ask, because let's suppose for a moment that you own your own restaurant under a free market society and you want people to come to your restaurant first and foremost over other restaurants, and you want them to spend money at your restaurant. What do? Well, I've asked this question to some people and they all gave me the same answers. Well, you have to work hard at it. You need to increase your skills in pleasing customers. You have to make them feel like royalty when they walk in the door. You have a hostess there who smiles and says, "Welcome to our restaurant. Please let me seat you. And what can we get you to drink? Is there anything you'd like to eat? What would you like to eat? How would you like it fixed?" On and on it goes, right? And that would include the hard work that I'm talking about. Includes you find ways to improve your attitude towards your customers. You desire to serve their needs. You also make sure that what you produce, in this case in your restaurant, that be food, is of higher quality. So that way, in general, your customers feel like they are just being treated like a king and a queen when they come into your restaurant, right? And then what happens when they feel that, when they're satisfied? Man, that was a great meal. We were treated great. I am going to come back here. I'm going to spend my money here. We can't wait to come back next time. Like, let's come back next week. Oh yeah, it's going to be so good in there. That's how they feel. And so they will continue to revisit. So, how does a woman get a man to want to spend money on her and her children? The same way that a restaurant gets customers to come to their restaurant over others and spend money at their restaurant. You see, as much as what you need to understand first and foremost is that a marriage, it is giving and giving. It's not necessarily give and take, it's give and give. That men are giving to women, women are giving to men. But men realize that his home is a business. He's got to bring money in to this place. And women oftentimes are not treating, at least housewives homemakers are not treating it like a business. It is. The money's coming from somewhere, and you really need to treat it like a business. Now, of course, it is the man giving of his own free will, but that's no different than somebody tipping a waitress giving of their own free will. All right? They don't have to give her anything, but they do to based on her service towards them, okay? And so what does a housewife and a homemaker, what does a woman in the relationship need to do in order to make sure that the man wants to pay for his children and pay for her and their home? Well, she needs to increase her skills in pleasing the man, which would include improving her attitude towards him, desiring to service his needs, making sure what she produces, in this case perhaps a clean home or delicious home-cooked meals or well-behaved children, is of higher quality. And in general, you make him feel like he's royalty in the home, right? She's in the house. When he comes in, make him feel like royalty. The Bible calls that reverencing the husband. And we're going to cover more on that later. I will get to a lot of those verses. I know I'm not quoting too much scripture right now, and that's because we're going to get to a lot of it later. I've got a whole section I'm going to cover called the biblical role of men. And we're really going to go deeper onto that, okay? And talk about some of the stuff in women. But you see, the New Age Bible versions out there, they replace the word reverence with the word respect. Well, you can respect a coworker, but you don't reverence them. Not like the woman is supposed to do with the man in a marriage. I mean, why not make your home be such a great place that, you know, when the coworkers are like, hey, you want to come hang out with us at the bar? And the man's like, no, I want to go home because I've got a wonderful meal and a wonderful wife to come home to, you know? And that he wants to be able to come home. He wants to bring his co-workers or friends into his home to show off his home and show off his wife and what a great place that they have there. I mean, that kind of thing, when I've mentioned those kind of things to women, when I've talked about these issues face to face, no matter what their attitude is on the subject, I always see them smirk a little bit. They always smile a little bit because they realize, yeah, that would be really nice. Because they like that concept. It's amazing. It's like they automatically enjoy that concept of being able to have something like that that's pleasant, okay? Now, of course, husbands are supposed to love their wives as well. And to love your wife, you have to consider her needs as well over your own as she would consider your needs over her own. That's the way it's supposed to work. But with feminism, it's destroying the female aspect that's supposed to be considering the man's needs over her own. And so when the men are left trying to give and give and give to the women, and the women stop giving to the men, you now put the men into almost a slavery type position. That's what's really happened, okay? But you see, anyway, getting back to the concept of child support, if men are given the liberty to pay, and they are to pay for these things, and they're welcomed back into a home where he feels like he's the king of the world, well, he's going to want to continue to give and want to continue to invest into more. He's going to, when he, even though it's a gift, like, okay, I'm going to get her a brand new refrigerator. This one's broken down. This one has more room. It has all these extra, features on it that's going to help her. Right? It's not that the old one didn't work, but he's like, the new one, it's going to give her a lot of other features and things that she can use. And what he's doing is he's considering her needs over his own. When he gives that to his wife, it's not something that, he loves her enough to consider what her needs are first. He didn't have to take it. He could have taken that paycheck and gone and blown it on himself, but he didn't. He considered what her needs were to try to make her life easier in the home. And many men have done this, made their wives' lives easier in their home by the things that they've done, the things that they've worked on, repairs they've made, things they've purchased, stuff they've built for her, to give her all these conveniences, and then have her turn around and just backtalk, just talking behind his back, kind of stab him in the back, talking with her friends, talking with her children, complaining about him to her children. That doesn't help the situation at all. He might be doing things wrong, but it doesn't help the position of respect for the man and what he's doing for her if he's in fact being responsible and doing all those things. I realize there's different circumstances and there's a lot of things we could talk about here. I'm even starting to get too convoluted right now. I need to kind of stop. But I want to give a general understanding of this, that feminists hate the concept of a good marriage. because they want men to pay for all their living expenses and that of their children, but they want to be divorced to them. Or in other words, they want men to still give them the resources. I want you to buy me all these things and pay for all this, but I don't want you to be around. That's like having a restaurant and you expect your customers to come to the door, leave money at the door, and walk away without getting a meal. We don't want you in here, we don't want to service you at all, but leave your money at the door. You really think people are going to go to a restaurant like that? And do women really think, these feminists really think they're going to get a man to come and want to support them when they act like that? See, these feminists, they're lazy women that don't want to do the work of making themselves look pleasant, acting kind and loving towards their husbands, and supporting the man in the way he needs, like an actual real wife and homemaker does. Okay, she gets, even though it's a giving of one another, she gets paid by him for the work that she does. He takes care of her for the work that she does. She's a real wife and homemaker that earns her keep, and these feminists want the same thing that a real wife and homemaker earns, but they don't want to do any work for it. And that's why I put a picture on the website here if you ever follow along. You can see that on the left. It's got this morbidly obese feminist. She's wearing all black with all her goth stuff. She's probably 300 pounds of her. And she's wearing this huge shirt that says, "I'm an effing feminist," bleeping it out, right? I censored all that out, so you didn't have to read that. But it's got her on the left, and on the right, it's got a nice thin lady with her nice hair done, and she's wearing her pretty dress and her apron. She's cooking in the kitchen. She's laughing the whole time. And I just put a question for men. Which woman would you want to marry, have children with, and support financially? Hands down, every time, you're going to have men pick the woman on the right, the latter one that I described. They would run and keep as far away from and have nothing to do the one on the left, the one I mentioned first. So again, I ask the question, as a woman, ask yourself, what could I do to make a man want to pay for his family? Now, I realize that there are such a thing as deadbeat dads. I'm not saying they don't exist, okay? There are men that just leave and they fornicate and they take off and they do their own things. Those men exist too, all right? But in this country, the majority of situations are mothers who choose to be single. They choose that path. They choose to raise their children fatherless. They choose to kick him out and want to use the government to force him to pay for them anyway without them having to actually do any of the work that it takes to normally earn that money. I mean, what about and some people may ask, well, what about the few women who've been raped and have a child? Should they get child support? No. Absolutely not. They say, Chris, that's a little harsh. No, what they should get is charity. It's sad that we have to have people turn to the government all the time, who steals money away from us via taxation. So what they do is the government forces her family, friends, church, and neighbors to give her money instead of her. She goes to the indirect source instead of going directly to her family, friends, church, and neighbors for charitable help in their time and money. Why can't you go to the church to get help? Where's the actual born-again Christians you can go to get help? Well, you see, that takes a little humility to do, and it's a lot easier to go to the government and demand it. Then you feel more justified in the money you get, don't you? Yeah? That's the way it works a lot of times. Again, the vast majority of single mothers in the U.S. have chosen to be single. That's what we have to keep in mind. And they're using the government to force men to pay for his family without him actually being able to be with them. It's cruel, and it's pathetic. And it's sad that these feminists don't want to do the actual work of a housewife and a homemaker, because it's not an easy job. It takes a lot of work. They don't want to be pleasant. They don't want to be pleasing in their attitude and be kind and beautiful and helpful women that any man would want to come home to. So instead, they choose to be mean and brawling and ugly feminists because they're too lazy to change themselves to be proper helpmeets as the Bible describes. I mean, if women really want to know what they need to do, go read Proverbs 31. Or you can go back to the teaching. We did a first half teaching because right now we're listening. These are the second half teachings on YouTube that we listen to. Our first half teaching, we go over Scripture. We have a whole section where we went over Proverbs. We went over Proverbs chapter 31. You can listen to that, or you can just go over it yourself. Read it. But this type of free market approach would encourage husbands and wives, first of all, to stay married and work out their problems. But feminists hate that thought. They don't want to actually work anything out. Men are expected to work hard to be good husbands, but the problem in our degraded American society is that women are not necessarily taught to work hard to be good wives anymore. And many of the women that I've met, especially in the cities and things like that, it's almost like they don't even get taught by their mothers what they ought to be doing to be a good wife. They get married and they have no clue what they're supposed to do. But it would be better, ultimately, that we give men the liberty of making the choice for themselves. And you might be surprised, because after all this stuff, after all the horrible things men are having to go through, they still want to pay for the women and children, don't they? Perhaps if you gave the liberty of them making the choice for themselves, and humbled yourselves a little bit, let them have the choice, men might surprise you. But don't ostracize him from the family through a divorce. That's the worst thing you could do. That's not going to help anything. Now, I realize that there's some people that file for a divorce, like a man files for a divorce and he runs off. That happens, okay? And there's nothing you can do about that. If he runs off, he runs off. But it's almost like they're trying to prevent any bad thing from happening to them whatsoever. Bad things are going to happen in life. You better accept that. If you're a young man or woman, you better accept that really quick. Bad things are going to happen in life, and there's sometimes you're not going to be able to do anything about them. You're going to have to learn to accept it. But I'm just encouraging women, learn to be the best wives the market has to offer, and you will see that you'll probably get the best customers the market has to offer, i.e., the best man the market has to offer. So, again, I would emphasize the biblical standards once again of keeping away from fornication, adultery, alcohol, all those things. Just keep away from them. If you follow God's instructions, it's going to keep Christians out of trouble. Period. But, again, men are held to this incredibly high standard. Women are getting all the privilege in the world, but we are told over and over it's male privilege. Men are the privileged ones in our society. What a load of garbage. But people believe it, because after all, Mr. TV tells us. And these feminists, they are screaming in their rage, so they must be right. Oh man, we're going to discuss details, by the way, on rape later, so you want to keep that in mind, because the truth about domestic abuse and rape, we're going to see the truth about that later. Everybody thinks it's the women that are most disadvantaged in that area. It is not the case. We're going to find out, okay? But men's lives are being ruined completely. They are being left homeless. It's running them into huge amounts of debt. They are working tirelessly to pay for women who could care less about them, and pay for children that they don't get to see. It's called female privilege. And one of the privileges that women really get, I mean, we haven't even begun to touch on why in court cases women are so favored, because really all they have to do is drop one word. One word a woman can drop and immediately have people running to her aid. She gets all the support she can imagine. Friends, family, neighbors, government. She gets all the support she can. She doesn't have to have any evidence. Women can get immediate free assistance and benefits by dropping, and she can destroy men's entire lives by dropping one word, and that word is abuse. And that's where we'll stop today, and we'll pick up on next week. We will talk about that. We're going to expose the truth behind domestic violence so you can see what's really going on. So, again, we'll end today. Anybody have any questions or comments before we close? Well, thanks for joining us, everybody, this week, and may our Lord Jesus Christ bless and protect you all as you seek to study His Word and glorify Him in all that you say and do, and God willing, we will see you next week.